Okay, so we are live and the sound is working. I can see the bar going up and down and I can see all our faces. So hi everyone out there on the internet who's either watching it now or will be watching it. Oh, you guys can see that too. Yeah, so I'm going to open up my correct tabs here. Yeah, okay. So today we're talking about the basic income trial experiment in Stockton, California. And last night, a couple of us, Richard and I, attended the John F. Kennedy Forum uh, at Harvard, where they had Michael Tubbs, the mayor of Stockton, and Chris Hughes, who's the co-chair of the Economic Security Project, who's funding the project in Stockton. So those guys were talking last night, and they answered questions from the moderator, who was economist Rema Hanna, and then they answered questions from the audience, and that was interesting. I have some clips from that discussion last night that we can look at, including the part where I asked a question, and some of us also read an article about the Stockton experiment, and yeah, so that's article from Business Insider. Just the first major basic income trial in the U.S. Announced how it plans to give away free money. So they talked about some of the details in here. So that's it. I think first I want to. I like going around to everyone at the beginning. So first I want to go around to everyone and get a sense of what you think about the Stockton basic income trial. I guess they're calling it Stockton's economic empowerment demonstration. So what do you think about the Stockton thing? And what do you think that programs like this can do for basic income? Do you think they're useful, and in what ways?
You mean like small scale experiments, or what do you mean like?
Small scale experiments. So there's also been the Ontario experiment recently, which was kind of canceled midway through, and a lot of people lost their basic income. So we can talk about that a little bit. But I just want to get people's sense of whether they think this is useful and in what ways they think it's useful. Yeah.
Okay. So I noticed in this article that they mentioned that they wanted to change people's conceptions of how lower income people would spend money, or kind of just about them in general. So I guess one useful thing that could happen is if it just demonstrates really clearly to people that having a higher income improves quality of life. That doesn't seem super controversial, but it's possible that people separate themselves so much, certain people from poor people, that like that humanizing actually needs to happen, that people don't imagine lower income people using money the same way that they would to make their lives better. So maybe some data on that would be helpful. I think the limitations are that short-term small-scale experiments don't tell you that much about kind of other aspects of the bigger picture in terms of what the impact of a basic income would be economically and also socially if it were normal and in the long term. I guess one more thing I'd say is like it kind of normalizes the idea of a basic income, that people are out there doing experiments on it, makes it seem like a kind of mainstream idea for which can maybe be helpful for people who are interested in promoting a basic income.
Sure.
They mentioned a few other experiments, and this one seems like the smallest of the ones that we talked about, at least with the number of people, and also, I guess, the cost. But it seems like a stepping stone. I think, it's going to need to be, eventually there'll have to be a larger experiment. 100, I looked at the population of Stockton. I'm from Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is like 170,000 people. And apparently Stockton is almost twice as big. So that just helped me like get a sense of how big the place is. And then 100 people out of that is very little. I think it would also be interesting to see if it matters that these 100 people are physically located close together or not. in a city that's, I mean, that's a really, again, you know, if you were to dilute 100 people evenly across a city that big, depending on how dense it is, you know, there might be some effects. But people with money are people with money no matter what. So there's seems interesting, but I don't really have much to compare it to.
So, my take on the program there last night, really the early discussion.
Were you there?
I had another meeting in the same building.
Oh, okay.
But I did listen to the video and I listened to your question.
Okay.
So my sense is that what they're doing is it's not UBI, and there are ways to do experiments or to kind of conjecture. I heard a guy earlier today who was the battlefield brigade commander in the Second Gulf War, who said, "Oh, if we'd only read the 1921 book," and I wrote down the guy's name of the whatever war in Iraq, we would have known what was coming in 2003. I wish I'd read the book before, you know. And so there's a sense of, oh, you can go back to this history book and you know, you really could have discerned, oh, we could have done everything differently in Iraq and it would have all come out better, or something like that. And so even in a historical example, you know, you try to make these comparisons. Sometimes I think that kind of thing can be a little bit strained. The objective of what is being done in Stockton does not appear to be the objective of UBI. Maybe there are some things you can learn from the experiment. I'm an engineer, I'm all about all the experiments. Really cool. But don't assume that the experiment is necessarily going to give you keen insight, because what you're trying to do in the experiment versus what you're trying to do with sort of like the notion of UBI, you know, I come at it a little bit more Fourth Industrial Revolution, and you know the Facebook guest sort of suggested, now I'm not really sure it's even going to kind of go that Fourth Industrial Revolution kind of way. And so anyway, long and short of it is, these kinds of experiments are useful. I don't think that this was exactly, it's not really UBI. Maybe you can learn some things there. Don't assume that no matter how it works out, it's going to be the definitive answer. Yeah, move forward with UBI or don't. It's a little bit. Maybe you can learn something.
Yeah.
I think that, like Brian was saying, you need to have more people in a like smaller area, or like sort of like with the management with Ontario, the experiment was canceled not in August and is running until the end of March. There's like Lindsay, or I think it is, there's like 2,000 people in a town of like 10,000, I think it is. So that's a significant portion of the town.
Yeah.
So you need to have, to be statistically significant, you need to have more people in a smaller area. So I think that's what's missing in one of the experiments.
Okay.
Not sure I have any thoughts in addition to what people said previously. A sort of initial impulse was like, oh yeah, you know, a sort of small scale, short term thing that could be a potentially, you know, useful trial for some of the reasons that Bethany lifted up. But it seems so small, like 100 people in a city that big. I'm like, okay, I'm not really. I mean, I'm not sure what exactly they'll be sort of like testing and seeing if it's like a quote unquote success. And so, yeah, you can hear some of Bethany's points about, okay, if it demonstrates, you know, to people like, oh, hey, if you give poor people money, they're not actually going to like spend it all on like crack and lottery tickets. Like, you know, many people will buy like food and do like quote unquote good thing, you know, to improve their lives. Like that could be helpful, but it feels like a really small scale. I understand why they're, you know, limited to people with certain incomes and not doing a huge amount of money, but 100 people feels like a really modest experiment.
Yeah. Sadiq?
Again, like a very similar thing on what everybody has been saying. I think it might be decent enough thing to show like personal like impact on a personal basis, but on a societal basis you can't really show anything with 100 people. Would it be better just if they just selected like a university class and be like, yeah, all of this class gets this much money? Would it be better in terms of like how it impacts the group rather than random families out in poor neighborhoods? And that was a little sketchy as well. Like I thought it was a little sketchy. They were like, yeah, we select people from poor neighborhoods, but it doesn't like your income doesn't matter. It's just the neighborhood mean income, I think,
Right.
or
Yeah.
median income.
Yeah.
So that was a little like,
It's median.
shouldn't that be? Yeah, it's median. Even then, like, should you be looking for like household income? Because impact, I assume, would be the maximum on the ones that have the least amount. So it seemed like a little odd thing in there.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder what specifically they're trying to learn by setting it
Yeah,
up that way.
I'm sure they have like an idea, like they have an idea of like who they're gonna select. Because
Right.
between like 1,000 going from, they were like, we're gonna mail 1,000 letters and then we're gonna select 100 people out of it. So I'm sure they have like a methodology in between of selecting like the right 100 people, I assume.
And I also wondered if they didn't want to disincentivize people from working or continuing to work. Like, I wonder if that's why they look at the neighborhood, not the income.
Yeah, maybe.
But if they want to look at whether people are working or not as an outcome variable, then they don't want to change.
Yeah, and hopefully they'll release all the methodology and what they did.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah.
You want to make some comments?
Yeah, so I think I agree with what everyone has said so far. And my intuition from the way they've set it up is that all they're really going to be able to tell is that giving people money helps them. And that sounds a little bit ridiculous for me to say that, but also hearing them talk, it sounds like that's really what they think they need to demonstrate. They really feel like there are, the majority of people out there believe that giving money to people is actually bad for those people, and they want to prove them wrong. So that doesn't sound correct to me. I think most people understand that if you give people money, that makes them better off. Maybe there's some exceptions or corner cases where yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah, you can finish.
I was gonna say where they're like addicted to drugs, and if they buy stuff, they'll that'll actually hurt them more if they have spending power. But those are very specific exceptions, and you don't necessarily want to address those kinds of problems by taking away people's money. I think there's other ways to do that. But I think by and large, giving people money is known to be something that's positive for the people you gave the money to. And it feels to me as if, I don't know if they know they're doing this, but it feels to me as if they've set up kind of a straw man, that they're saying, oh, society doesn't think that giving people money helps them, and we're going to prove them wrong, when really that's not what needs to be demonstrated. Yeah, Richard?
Well, the Economic Security Project is also setting up another program in Mississippi called the Magnolia Mothers Trust, I think it is, and it's starting in November, which is before this, and they're handing out $1,000 a month to, I believe it's 1,000 families or something. I don't know. So that actually seems more relevant than this says, but
Yeah, and what's the purpose of that experiment?
Well, pretty much what you said about they're not going to see if they're not going to spend it on drugs and whatnot. I actually sent you an article about that.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking about how rare it is, especially before Give Directly, for people to give money charitably just directly to people. So, it sounds like, and I guess I was wondering like what the logic is behind that. Is it that it's controversial that giving them money would make them better off, or maybe it's just a more interesting question of like how best to spend the money? Like maybe iodine supplements are really cost effective and cheap and help a lot of people or whatever. But I guess that was making me wonder two things. One, maybe it is widely felt that you shouldn't just give people money directly, based on a sense that the people who don't have money maybe don't have money because they don't know how to be responsible with money. And so, even though giving me money, of course, would make me better off, whatever, giving those people money, I'm caricaturing the position, right? Like, that's not a good idea. So I wonder if that's more meaningful than we think. And I guess my second question is or point is that it would have been interesting maybe to contrast, or like a question I feel like people don't know the answer to is if you contrasted, say, the same amount of money going towards like food stamps or the kinds of limited programs that we do now, giving people $200 versus $200 in food stamps and tracking how those work might be a more public might be a richer question than just like does giving them money do something, because those seem like the real questions that these policymakers are trying to think about. And there's this benefit of flexibility with giving people money directly. And I think Give Directly has sort of tried to do that kind of test, like comparing it maybe to other things.
So you're saying maybe they know that giving people money helps them, but maybe they think that perhaps spending money in some other way could be more beneficial, and they're demonstrating that the cash is actually a better way to spend whatever limited amount of money we have in our budget.
Yeah, and that would be a more interesting test, I think, on a small scale. Like give people have a control group, like somebody mentioned, or like give people, some people get a certain amount of money in food stamps or whatever, whatever the status quo kinds of programs are, and some people get just cash. Of the same, the same amount maybe, and see.
So it's basically like comparison of do we know better than you how to spend your money.
Right, exactly. But I think that's more controversial than whether giving people money makes them better off.
Right.
Is like, would it be better to give them food stamps than just the money, right? Because the food stamps money is going to food, and so I think. But then on the other hand, maybe people don't need that money for food, as they want to spend some of that on something else. So.
Somebody will be like, I don't need that much food.
No, definitely. When I was on food stamps, I had way more money than I wanted to spend on food. When I'm like, oh, can't spend it on anything else, so I'm gonna get some fancy food.
Right. So I think, and a lot of people talk about giving homeless people food instead of money, stuff like that. So I think that's a really common idea, that you should give people something more targeted. So if they had controlled, they had compared the two, it seems like you would have learned more than just giving people money. I don't know what their comparison to not giving them money, I guess.
Yeah.
It is funny the way that you put it. If I say, oh, it's better if I give you, beggar for food, or give you food instead of giving you $5, then I'm saying that I know better. That is a little bit ridiculous.
That's what it is.
Right.
That's what it boils down to.
Yeah. It does boil down that way.
Right.
And then it's what should we just let the market decide what to do with those people that can't spend their money properly? I guess maybe we should. I don't know.
Let people make their moves.
Yeah. I'm also wondering, maybe this kind of experiment would make more sense. I mean, this is kind of what we were all saying. Maybe it would make more sense to make precisely a neighborhood, regardless of how many people are in it, and just say this neighborhood gets everybody in this neighborhood, just because maybe the neighborhood is more insulated as an economic unit, or instead of having these random people throughout a city that just get a little bit of money. But kind of like what he was saying earlier, Richard was saying earlier, with 2,000 inside of 10,000 is way more than.
Yeah. Elizabeth, did you have something you want to say?
No, it's fine.
Okay. Richard,
there's actually, I believe it's in the Netherlands, they have these postal lotteries that if someone wins it, everyone in their neighborhood gets so much for a year.
That's interesting. Yeah, so I don't know how much benefit you get from, concentrating it all in a small area. Because even if you're focusing on one neighborhood, that neighborhood is not a closed economy. Right. So there's still it's not like it's not like you have an isolated system that you can pull levers on or something like that. Yeah.
Although I think there's a lot of social effects that are a little bit more isolated. So you could see the effect if you're still surrounded by people who don't have a lot of money. That might change what people are pressuring or not pressuring you to do, whether people are asking you for money all the time because you're the one person that has money coming. There's a lot of weird things that could happen or dilute the effect, I think, if it's just you. Whereas a whole, even if you're the one lower income person in a you know, same thing. But anyway, if you have the whole community have more money, it seems like the social consequences might be different. I thought that was kind of what I thought
Yeah,
people
okay.
had in
The
mind.
question that immediately jumps to mind is how big does it have to be closed? And the answer is the world
Yeah.
is not, I mean, a country in itself is not a closed.
Yeah.
Right.
So you can't just make it so big that it's like a perfect closed off.
Yeah.
But maybe you can make it so big that it's reasonably closed off. And I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think at the level of a country, you know, if you implemented a basic income, it might, you know, it would certainly maximize the extent to which citizens of that country could, you know, benefit from the economy. So I think just like if you're giving a basic income to a small group, it benefits those people. If you give it to everyone in the country, it benefits everyone in the country. And then the question is, once you start getting like really large scale, the question is, what can the economy handle? Like if you're just giving basic income to a small group of people, they're going to still be able to buy all the stuff that they or all the stuff that they could buy with that money. It's not going to cause any like price, you know, fluctuations or something like that. And just kind of, I think the bigger you get, the more you can see those kinds of effects and see what the limits are.
This goes back to my thing about, again, if you're in a dense community, or rather if you just do this within a specific like political boundary community, I feel like you would actually see a microcosm of those economic effects that you're talking about. You know what I'm saying? Just because, like, you know, I don't have to walk or drive as far. Okay, I'm just loosely stringing words, but I'm saying that it works better as, you know, an analog to a larger system if you actually force this thing to be tinier.
Yeah.
Force it to be denser.
I think you could imagine, and I think there's an analog when you scale it up too, but I think you can imagine for that small community, everyone's getting high enough basic income, then everyone in that community stops working. So they're not buying from each other anymore, they're buying from outside the community. And then if you gave basic income to everyone in the United States, and other people in the world weren't receiving basic income, then maybe we'd be importing a lot more and not making as much of our own stuff, that kind of thing. But I think once everyone in the world is getting a basic income, then you start seeing like, well, we can't just import everything, so we have to make our own stuff. So then you start to see the limits of what the basic income can be without causing inflation and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So the world is your closed system.
Yes.
That's, you know.
Yes.
What do you think there's anything special about the level of a currency, like a government that controls a particular currency? So, for example, like I guess the United States is one country that controls its own currency. There are other countries like that. I guess Japan is like that, right? And
Almost all countries.
A lot of them are.
Right.
Europe is kind of weird.
Oh yeah, I was trying to leave out Europe because it's a little bit weird, but like, you know,
Yeah.
countries that control their own currency, is there anything special about that unit in terms of having that basic income experiment across that whole system?
I think just the fact that you can isolate that unit and implement the basic income through that currency and through that country's citizens. But that money would still flow out into the global economy and interact with all of that.
But people would be able to see the impact on the value of whatever that currency is, which is one of people's primary concerns.
Right, and if you have a big country like the United States, where the dollar is not only a very strong currency, but it's also the world reserve currency, and we've got a lot of leverage to be able to kind of maintain the stability of that currency. We can really test the capacity of the global economy to produce stuff for us using this.
Right.
Yeah.
Brings up, how do you measure? Just a question, a new question. How do you measure do you measure the way and then maybe the speed at which money moves through populations, physically located populations? Like if I give, like just say I gave, everybody in Kansas huge basic income.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's less likely to start. It's not going to affect the economies that are physically further away before affecting the economies that are closer, right? There has to be some sort of, or maybe with electronic banking that doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I think it depends on what the stuff is that people ordinarily buy. Like, if most of your stuff you buy from local shops and stuff, then it's going to affect that. But if most of the stuff you're buying is already, you know, like you're buying on Amazon and it's made in China and, you know, like that kind of stuff, then it's going to affect that.
Okay, yeah. So, all right. I mean, stuff always has to be, well, if you're buying products, things have to be made. It has to be a physical thing that's made and then moved towards you. But yes, the money goes to wherever the thing is made.
Everybody gets a small cut, but that's about it.
Yeah.
Your community would get at least like a small portion of it, at least the shipping cost or whatever.
Right.
Whoever's working in that area might be some more jobs, but not 1,200 people.
Yeah.
And you start thinking some local bump, I mean, because like you're not gonna like order gas for your car from Amazon,
Right.
and so you know, and like if you're like, oh yeah,
You're not going to get a massage from
Normal stuff.
China.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, those are then that's a service too. That's why
Yeah.
it comes
Yeah.
in that out. But yeah.
Yeah, there are some prices that are very kind of dependent on the local economies. So if you go to, you know, you go to some places that are really expensive, like Switzerland, and what it means to be really expensive is that the same amount of money, you know, taking exchange rates into account, is going to buy you a lot less stuff at the local stores. But that doesn't mean that the prices of stuff on Amazon isn't exactly the same as it is everywhere else, and that kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah, I think. So kind of back to the Stockton experiment, I think one big thing that it does is it draws attention to basic income. And what they're doing is not exactly basic income, but they've chosen to use the term basic income. And I think, you know, Michael Tubbs I've seen a comment where he expressed frustration that they were confusing what he was doing with the universal basic income. But I think that was also a choice, because he wanted to kind of bring in that contingent. And, you know, like people are talking about it in the basic income communities, and people are talking about Chris Hughes and his plan in the basic income communities. He's the Economic Security Project guy. So I think there's like this political benefit with kind of associating yourself with basic income. And there's kind of this, I see this in politics sometimes where certain terms mean very specific things, and then people kind of dilute the meaning of those terms to kind of include more and more people in their coalition, that kind of thing. So I think this is a little bit of an example of that. Yeah. Why don't we get to a quote from the article? This one. We hope to challenge the entrenched stereotypes and assumptions about the poor and the working poor that paralyze our pursuit of more aggressive solutions. SEED wrote in its report, that's the Stockton Economic Empowerment Demonstration, I believe, wrote in its report, we aim to illustrate how widespread and episodic poverty is. What does that mean?
That's kind of what Leslie was saying about, you know, they have to prove, well, and you, saying that giving money to people most likely going to make them better off. That should be up.
Yeah.
But you know, we're out to prove that it is, or we're still out to prove it, even though we think it should be up.
Yeah. Elizabeth.
Well, and I think their widespread and episodic gets it, their like randomization of it, which I'm not sure how effective they're going to get if it's only 100 people. But if they're tracking for 18 months and they're not, I mean, it's like a means testing in the sense of you have to have a certain household income, or at least your neighborhood has to, but you don't have to be working during it, and so that potentially enables them to track, like, oh, look, you know, people, like how people sort of like not exactly slip in and out of poverty, but like, oh, you're unemployed, you're then employed in like the gig economy, and then you're unemployed again. And so if they're tracking people's spending habits, like that can sort of also push back against some of the narrative, like, oh, well, poor people just need to work harder or get a job or something. If they're like, oh, okay, well, we can see, that these people are still continuing to work or look for work even after we've given them money, but, they're sort of shifting in and out of the labor market, like shifting in and out of the federal poverty threshold.
Yeah. So this maybe partly explains why they chose to do it by median income of the neighborhood. If they think that poverty is something that just ordinary people, slide into every once in a while and or not, then they can look at their main trial group, and then they can look at their control group, and they can see, okay, the people who weren't in poverty, like how many of them kind of slipped into poverty in the 18-month period in the control group, and then how many did in the group receiving the basic income. So that could be a big part of why they're doing that. Yeah.
I don't know if that data is 100 people, like data from 100 people is enough to make any.
Well, there's 100 people who are be receiving the basic income, and then I think like 200 to 300 people in the control group. So I don't know if that's enough, but I think it's probably useful. Yeah.
So they want to see if it's like an effective buffer, maybe.
Yeah, if it not only like lifts people in poverty out of poverty, but prevents people from falling into poverty. Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought about it.
Yeah.
I think it might also be useful to say that no matter how many people you do this with, you're still going to get useful information about the individual you're of 100, or 100 people versus 200 people, and that's useful no matter, like I said, it's useful no matter how many people it is. So I think the reason maybe you're all like beating on the size of this thing is that you're almost certainly, and I can just see this as a layman, you're almost certainly not going to see any like grand economic effects in the city of Stockton. But so what? I think that you're still going to get useful information about the behavior of individuals.
Well,
that are doing this.
I think part of it is that the behavior of individuals changes depending on the economic context in which they're living. So a normal basic income that goes to everyone is going to change that context. So you could, for example, observe that in a Stockton experiment, everyone receiving a basic income quits their job. But in the real world, if we had an actual basic income, that same incentive just means, okay, now the labor market has to adjust, how it gets people to work and stuff like that, right? It doesn't mean that, if you give a basic income to everyone, it doesn't mean everyone quits their job. If you give a high enough basic income to a really small group of people, maybe everyone quits their job. But that doesn't tell you what's going to happen when it scales up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess
I don't think everyone's.
But if your goal is just to prove that giving money to people helps them, then it's fine. Just watch it.
And for you to see those effects, I guess like you really have to split it up. Like even if you would at least have to capture city, I would say, or like a major chunk of the city, which would be very difficult to do given there's no. It's like privately funded.
It is privately funded, yeah.
Yeah, so that would be difficult if you scale it up to anything that is statistically significant within the population of the city. Like from 100 to few thousands at least.
Yeah. But you still run into the problem of how big of a system do you need it to be closed enough. That doesn't really make sense.
In the labor market, I was saying, not for like the economy. At least you would see the impact in the labor market.
Yeah. If you got it big enough to where people aren't gonna like up and move because of those changes. Yeah, I guess that's kind of an interesting way to maybe define like the minimum size necessary to get some useful information.
The duration is also really important though too, because even if you gave some people a high basic income, but they're only going to get it for a year or two, they're probably not going to quit their jobs,
right?
Because they're going to need those jobs later. So like, if you can't expect it indefinitely, you're just going to do something totally different.
Yeah, and that's not a lot of money. It's like $500.
Well, yeah. I think he was saying like if you had a lot higher amount, but even if you had a lot higher amount, people are going to do weird things if it's short term. They're going to just save it, or they're going to whatever.
Yeah, and it's interesting with the with the Ontario one that was canceled in the middle in August,
Right.
because people were kind of planning around how long they would be getting this basic income
Right.
for, and then it was cut off in the middle. So yeah, I talked to a woman last week who is one of the recipients of that, and she's trying to like organize a support organization and help people out, and she said like a lot of people are really depressed and they're having a hard time because if you're planning a certain amount of money and you don't have it, you know, that can screw you over. You might be worse off than you were before you thought you were going to get that money.
Yeah. How much did they pay?
It's 1,700
A month?
It's Canadian dollars, so it's something like 1,200 or something.
Yeah. It was an impactful amount, and you know, when it was going on, people were saying that it made a huge difference in their lives and all of that.
Right.
Because I mean, it's not just like that's not necessarily your only income. It's on top of whatever else you're doing.
Right.
Yeah. And when they stopped it, just out of curiosity, they didn't just like cut it off the day of, right?
No, it ends at March 31st.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, it hasn't ended yet?
Not yet.
Oh.
Yeah, I was gonna say that'd be really extreme if you just quit like one day.
Yeah,
But it's
that's
still ending early compared to
Early to compared to people's plans. I'm sure.
That's like minimum wage for a month, $100 almost. It's like 165 hours of work, 165.5.
Yeah.
Great job, more or less.
Right.
Having a teenager to work for you.
So here's another quote. In our economic structure, the people who work the hardest oftentimes make the least, Tubbs said. I know migrant farm workers who do backbreaking labor every day, or Uber drivers and Lyft drivers who drive 10 to 12 hours a day in traffic. You can't be lazy doing that kind of work. This is interesting because it kind of brings up this whole value judgment of how much you get paid, you know, should somehow correspond to how hard you work and that kind of thing.
Does anybody know the Marx theory on labor?
Labor theory of value?
Yeah, labor theory of value.
I mean, yeah, do you want to?
No, I would ask this serious question.
Yeah, so he basically...
I know it vaguely. I just read a book about Marx that was published last year. Remind myself of some stuff. But the the notion of there's Marx and there's Marxism, and they're not the same. And a lot of people, even today, I think a lot of people sort of latch on to Marx for reasons that include they probably haven't read a lot about him. But anyway, to the point here, just this notion of maybe something's cost or value should be reflective of the labor that went into it. And we're talking back years ago.
Yeah,
this is sort of getting at that. You know, why does
this reflects the Marx philosophy, and you know what, Marx didn't come up with that on his own. You know, Adam Smith starts his Wealth of Nation by saying that I forget the exact quote, but the opening line is basically that all the value in the economy is ultimately generated by the labor that goes into producing things. And Marx just kind of took that and doubled down on it. It wasn't like a new thing that he came up with. And I think Adam Smith was wrong. And I think it was maybe harder for Adam Smith to see that he was wrong because it was kind of right before the Industrial Revolution and all of that. And what ended up happening was you had all these machines and all this technology that was allowing us to become so much more productive, and then it was decreasing the wages that would go to labor. So Marx looked at that, and he was a product of his time too, and he said, well, we all know that labor is the fundamental unit of value, so therefore there's exploitation and we need to fight and everything like that. But another response that someone could have had at that time was to say, hey, maybe this whole labor theory of value thing is actually not accurate because the real world does not reflect this, and maybe we need to come up with something else. Unfortunately, that's not what happened, and we had class wars and all of that. That was my little rant about Marx. Yeah, but I think this is reflected here, and I think I've noticed that not just these guys, but in a lot of basic income discussions, there's kind of like other kind of moral values that get kind of pulled into the argument and stuff like
I
that.
guess I just want to, like, a lot of things in this article, like you pointed out too, they're kind of like vaguely related to the idea of the basic income experiment, but you almost have to make a lot of connections and like figure out why they're bringing this up. And I guess my sense of why is this idea again of whether it's like morally right or like to give people money, or whether they like this idea they have to deserve it enough in some way.
Right.
And this is somehow justification for people deserving to have money, is that they're already working hard. The implication is that if people are not working hard, they don't deserve to have money, which kind of brings up that discussion about what should be an entitlement and so on that we were talking about before.
Yeah, last week.
But yeah, there's this idea that people have to earn the money even if they're not earning that specific money, in a way. Here they have to earn it by being hardworking people in general.
Right. And it's framed less as a question of what do we need from people and how do we get them to do it, and more of a question of what are people doing for us to deserve us, like rewarding them, that kind of thing. Yeah. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Although, I mean, in fairness, I mean, the preceding sentence to that paragraph is Tubbs previously told Business Insider that the basic income pilot could give people more opportunity to find fulfillment in their lives. So it's, so I suspect that part of what his perspective is like, oh, the amount of money that people are making in the labor market is not always aligned with how hardworking they are. And so in that particular quote, he's pointing out like, oh, there are people who are really poor but are working really hard. But I didn't click on the like previously told Business Insider link, but I would guess that in that he maybe talks more about, oh, maybe we shouldn't have people working 12 hours a day driving for Uber or picking strawberries.
Right, so maybe the fulfillment would come from being able to scale back their hours or something like that. Yeah, that's fair.
Right. So maybe he's making less of a strong connection between they're working so hard and they deserve to be paid more, and maybe more of a connection with these people are maybe working harder than they need to, and the basic income would help them balance their lives more.
Yeah. The sort of like, people should be making some like livable amount, and like, oh, here are the people who are like working really hard, implied parentheses like we say they should, but they're still not, making enough to live on, and so the basic income would enable them. That's sort of using them as an example. Like, even the people who are doing what we say they should aren't succeeding in the system, and so we should have this system make this new. Right.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think, go ahead.
It's just interesting because this psychology seems like it seems designed, or it seems like what you would see if you desperately needed to motivate people to do the most work that they can. And I think it's just interesting because at least your view of the economy is that we really don't need to be doing that. But this is kind of like the proximate psychology of people like punishing anybody who doesn't seem to be like working as much as they can.
Yeah, but I also think I like Elizabeth's point, because I think it also draws attention to maybe the fact that our normal expectations of how things work maybe need to be challenged. So like if you're writing an article and you're expecting the audience of the article, or for Michael Tubbs and you're speaking to Business Insider, and you're expecting, an audience where most people believe that, people have to work hard and hard work deserves to be rewarded, and you say, wait a minute, all these people are working really hard and they're not being rewarded maybe the way that our society typically thinks they should, then maybe we need to rethink some of those assumptions. So that's kind of a more generous way, I think, to interpret this.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Thanks, Elizabeth.
You're welcome.
I think you could say that like the money is sort of an intermediate. If people are working hard, they should not money. If people are working hard, they should just have a good life, which may mean working hours. But the money is not really the thing. The money is just sort of a mechanism for the economy to do what it does. I think one thing that gets overlooked when you make this connection when you make this Karl Marx connection is that when I first started coming here and talking to you guys about this, one of the first connections I made, or one of the first explanations that really helped me out, was that basic income should just be an input parameter to a well-functioning economy. That's it. It's just a number.
Right.
It doesn't have to be tied to ethics at all. Really, I mean, there's no reason to tie it up to how often people work or something. So I think you don't have to think about. I think that gets overlooked when you make a statement like this. I think it's also very hard to prove that thing when you do a tiny experiment. It's pretty hard to demonstrate that basic income is just a number that helps an economy work better, that helps this equation work better.
Yeah.
That helps, and you can't do that with numbers.
Yeah, and I don't think they're thinking about basic income in this way.
Well, Martin was saying earlier, this experiment doesn't really look like universal basic income. I suppose it's not, because you're not just giving everyone. Yeah.
Right.
Money. So.
Go ahead, Richard.
In New Zealand, they ran an experiment where people in a company worked 4 days a week and they were paid for 5. And they were given like flex time and things like that, and their personal lives and whatnot were significantly better, and the company performed so much better that they actually adopted it earlier this month.
There's a lot of software companies that kind of do that thing. Like 1 day a week, for like half a day, you get time to do basically whatever you want. But it's supposed to be kind of helping out the company or helping out but it's like self-guided. You're still getting paid to do whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's like sort of.
But that has a lot to do with, I guess, the labor market as well. In that particular field, you would not see that like everywhere. It's just very limited software engineers.
Yeah, well, and it's
what the
the
demand is.
company's discretion to do something.
Yeah, but then like if the entire market, basically if not the entire industry is doing it, it's, I guess, a difficult choice for a single company to go ahead and do it, because it is definitely losing you some money.
Yeah, well, I think, to Richard's point, the idea is that you might be able to prove that it doesn't. That actually
Exactly.
makes you.
Yeah.
And it also incentivizes, smart people to come work for it.
Yeah.
It improves industry standards, as they say.
Yeah, and it's also, how they frame it, I think, makes a big difference. Because if you're working 4 days a week and being paid for 5, that is, equivalent to getting a raise and working 4 days a week and working 4 and being paid for 4. Excuse me.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the exact same thing, but then they're kind of like talking about it as if there's like some expected market price for it 1 day of work and you're getting paid for 5 of them. And only
Except that I think one thing that's different is like a lot of jobs don't pay you by the day, so it's not exactly like you have the option to get a higher salary and work fewer days.
Right,
like
you'll get your yearly salary and only work 4 days a week.
But a lot of jobs don't allow you to do that. I think they actually like expect you to be in there doing stuff.
Yeah, we're talking about the change that happens is that people are only working, like what Richard brought up.
Right,
people are only working 4 days.
But you were
a week.
saying it's a framing thing, and I'm saying it isn't because you can't actually take the option of being paid more for like per day and working fewer days. Usually, that's not an option that you have on the table.
No, there is a thing that's happening that's different. That's changed.
Right.
You're only working 4 days a week instead of 5.
Right.
The framing part comes into whether you say you're being paid for 5 days a week and only working 4, or whether you're just working 4 days a week and have a higher salary.
Oh, I see. Like how they frame the
that's
experiment.
the framing part. That's all I was pointing
That's
out. Yeah. I wanted to come back to Bryant's point from earlier about the number of basic income just being kind of like a parameter for the economy. And I think the way these guys are thinking about it is whether they're thinking about this guaranteed income program in Stockton or they're thinking about universal basic income as we know it here. I think in either case, they're thinking about the government has a certain, like we were talking about earlier, the government has a certain budget, and then how do you spend that money? So I think once you're kind of thinking about it from that framework, it starts to make sense to make these comparisons and have like figure out whether it's more efficient to target it and like that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And that seemed to be the direction he was going. I guess you'll show this clip, but like in his answer to your question,
Yeah.
he listed a lot of programs, things like that.
Yeah, I think I'll do that now. See, 27, 5. That's not working. Yes.
You might need to change your computer settings.
You have responsibility to come back and do something if you want to. So those are two of the things we're doing now to make sure folks know that when they come back, not just come back, but come back and contribute.
That's great. Okay, we'll take 2 questions here.
Hi, I'm Alex Howlett. I host a weekly basic income discussion group here in Cambridge, and tomorrow we're going to be talking about you guys. So I've noticed that both of you have kind of tried to distinguish what you're doing from a universal basic income. Like there's important key differences that you both have cited. So my question is just, what do you think about universal basic income, and do you support it?
It's a great question.
Let's take one more and then we'll another one.
Hi, I'm Andrew. I'm at the med school. My question was, assuming the pilot goes well, what are the next steps for scaling it nationally?
Okay.
So I'll take the first one first.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely supportive of a basic income universally. I haven't done as much of the economic analysis as Chris. I think for me, I start at a guaranteed income, just being pragmatic and thinking, if we can't get everyone, I want to help the people who need it most first as a starting point, and that's why I'm so aggressively focused on this guaranteed income. But I do think once we get there, there's space and room to talk about a universal basic income. But I'll also say that's also why things like carbon tax and things are.
All right. So I think he's clearly, he wants to help people right now, and he's doing this thing. And I think he also wants to demonstrate something and draw attention to what he's doing. But I definitely, seems like he thinks like an actual basic income is really cool, and he would be excited about that. He just hasn't thought about it or hasn't, had the full picture.
Right, and he's to the degree that he's thinking about it, he's thinking about how to fund it. Like he's about to talk about carbon taxes as a way to fund
Right.
it.
So then he's about to talk about carbon taxes. So he's still thinking about it in this framework of, well, where do you get the money from? We've got a budget. We need to raise the revenue somehow. This is, like he's thinking about it within that framework. And it's hard to get the right answer of how to implement a basic income properly if you're coming at it from that angle of having a budget. So,
should we hear the rest of it?
yeah, let's hear the rest of it, and we'll hear Chris Hughes talk too, and I might pause it again. But I just wanted to point out that he's not like against basic income, and you'll see that maybe Chris Hughes kind of is a little bit more.
So interesting to me because I think that's a way we could get to a universal sort of basic thing a lot quicker.
And I would say similar things. I think of UBI as really a theory and not a policy.
You love his
Okay.
And by that I mean the theory
First of all, he doesn't say
is
similar things. Second.
It's a theory and not a policy. So I'm just going to say that basic income is a very specific thing. It's you're giving everybody the same amount of money at regular intervals. Like that's what it is. It's not. That's all it is. It's like maybe you have some ideas that are associated with that, or you want to achieve similar things that you think other people think of basic income.
This is more a metaphysical theory.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that everything that happens the day after you start doing that is conjecture. I mean, at this point, it's very informed conjecture, but
I mean, you can have them.
But that's true of policy too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
And
you can have a
haven't
model.
watched this, but like my guess is that Chrissy was like, oh, but it's just sort of this idea instead of like a policy that is like we're gonna make the minimum wage $15 or we're gonna like expand Medicaid to everyone.
Right.
Like those are
Right.
feel more like if you were like, oh, we're gonna give everyone, we've decided that a living wage is X and we're gonna give everyone that amount and probably also he might think of like, here's how we're going to fund it as maybe a necessary part of policy.
Right.
I mean, you can have like a policy proposal that doesn't have
Yeah,
a component, but
he's not saying that we don't know what's going to happen when we implement a basic income. What he's more saying is that basic income is not like a concrete thing that we can define. Which is
definitely is.
We define it every week here. Yeah.
Too bad you couldn't have crosstalk with him.
I know, right? Yeah. So
Yeah.
I just
He's thinking
when he
about
said that.
specific numbers. What's the interval? What's the
Well, you'll see what he
interval?
says.
You'll
right?
see.
He'll tell you
It's
what
more.
he thinks.
It's
people
more than that.
Yeah.
We'll see.
No one should live in poverty.
Oh, let me back up a second.
Yeah, he's saying
We
it's
should
the
use
idea
cash.
that no one should live in
So
poverty,
interesting to
not
me
a
because I think
Right.
that's a way we can
Sorry,
get
I
to
had
a
to-
universal
had to
sort
interrupt
of
him there.
basic thing a lot quicker. And I would say similar things. I think of UBI as really a theory and not a policy. And by that I mean the theory is no one should live in poverty. We should use cash to prevent it.
So you see what I mean?
Like that's not what Alex would define basic income.
Right. He's saying that there's like this idea that we shouldn't have poverty and that we can solve it using cash. And I would say that that's, like basic income actually doesn't even go that far. I think a lot of people who believe in basic income believe that we can afford a high enough basic income to eradicate poverty, but that's not in the definition of basic income.
Yeah, that's in the thing you read. Yeah,
It's in the-
you say that.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
If only these
Feeling
people had
Christian-
listened to Alex.
Yeah. Watch what it is. But,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the idea that we can end poverty, that's based on some assumptions, and they're assumptions that I think are correct, which is that we have the resources to end poverty. But it's like you have to take basic income, and then you have to add in we have the resources to end poverty, and then when you have the resources to end poverty, then the basic income is going to end the poverty, right?
Yeah.
It's like those two ingredients.
And then poverty falls out of doing this and then just doing this in the right circumstances.
Right. The end of poverty falls out of having a properly functioning economy and having the resources to end poverty.
Yeah,
The two of those together. Yeah.
So it wouldn't even necessarily need to be basic income, but because basic income goes to everyone, and so you could do a thing where like, we're just going to give a lot of dollars to poor people and like also end poverty.
Yeah.
Cash.
I mean, I think it's if you're not thinking about budgets, it's cheaper to just give it to everyone.
Yeah.
It's more efficient. Yeah.
But she's right that theoretically you could end poverty without.
When Chris is like, it's a theory
You
where
could.
we end poverty by giving people cash. I'm like, no, that's called giving poor people cash.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
Exactly.
So then he's about to list some of the stuff he just said. So yeah.
And it's so simple that it sounds like almost comic, but it
Not what it
is
sounds
not, the conventional wisdom in America today. And so I think that the increase in interest in UBI, I have real issues with the automation frame, that the robots are going to come take the jobs. I'm sort of, I don't actually think that's true. That's not yet in the economic data. Maybe it is, maybe I'm wrong. We could have a debate with Elon Musk about this. And
So I just want to say that I agree with him here, but probably for different reasons than he believes what he believes. There's a reason why it's not borne out in the economic data, and that's because we use economic policy to create jobs for people, jobs that don't necessarily need to exist. So it's never going to be borne out in the economic data until we have something like a basic income that allows us to eliminate the jobs. You guys have heard me say this before.
All of
But you can imagine, I'm sitting here in the audience listening to this.
You were
Yeah.
here in person. It was an answer to your question.
It was an answer. Yeah, it was an answer to my question. Actually, that's a good point. Yeah.
Oh, this is. I don't hear any shouting from you, so you had great forbearance.
I was good. Yeah.
What's the difference between giving people a basic income and then everything just being free, very, 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 very cheap because of being by a robot? Or would that just be a case where the basic income?
Yeah. So what you don't want in the economy is you don't want deflation. You want like the purchasing power of the money to stay stable, so you have kind of a standard unit of value over time in which you can set prices and supply can meet demand and all of that. So that's important. But that's not to say that certain things won't become very cheap or free. But on average, the stuff that people buy kind of has to stay at the same average price over time, roughly.
On the other end, like you do have a cap on how much resources you actually have. You can't
Well,
just
there's that.
produce
There's
infinite resources.
Right.
But eventually, we're going to be converting solar energy.
And not just resources in terms of energy, but material as well, right?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think I'm addressing it. I think at some point we're going to be doing alchemy with solar energy. Seriously, but maybe on the horizon.
To some extent, probably.
But the other thing that you said maybe a couple weeks ago is that there will always be someone that comes up to you and says, "Hey, I'll pay you $1 to do something other than what you're doing."
Yeah.
There will always be jobs by that definition.
Yes.
Jobs. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think he's obviously overlooking.
But that doesn't mean we can't eliminate a lot of the things that fall under our kind of definition of jobs right now. Like jobs in the future, you know, might not necessarily pay some certain minimum amount, and they, you know, a lot of them might not be as structured, and it might just there might be a more kind of a fluid I guess continuum between like the stuff that people just do and then the stuff that people do and get paid, and there's not like this special designation of like, oh, now you're in a labor contract that comes with all these restrictions and that kind of thing. And I think, and I think if we had a basic income, that could help us move toward that. And in terms of what he's thinking of as jobs when he's talking about this, a lot of those could be eliminated. Yeah. And there is a lot of kind of wasteful time that's being spent in our economy through the labor market because we're trying to get incomes to people through jobs. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. All right, so we'll continue. Martin, what do you think? What did you think about this comment, by the way? Because this is your thing.
Well, you know, I mentioned that you know that I heard him sort of make that.
Yeah.
You know, as I've shared in the group here, I don't think it's around the corner.
Right.
Okay, but I think that there is value in discussing, you know, what that future economy looks like. And I mean, in the broad political sphere, I'd just like to see there be a little bit more, I'll call it open-mindedness for lack of a better word. And I'm sort of thinking about, this is, you know, hang with me on this one, nanotechnology, in the sense of materials at the nano scale exhibit properties that are different than at the non-nano scale. And so, and that's, you know, sort of the kind of the first amazing discovery about nanotechnology. It's like, wow, these materials have all these what we consider exotic properties because they're not the properties that, you know, we know the stuff,
like
gold, whatever, all these different things, right? So, with the same sort of idea that, okay, we see here by experimentation, we know that materials, the same material at the nanoscale, very different, exhibits very different qualities, properties, okay? In other words, like, it's real, it's happening, it really does certain things at the nanoscale that it doesn't do at the scale that we know these materials. A future economy could be so significantly different that we wouldn't even think of the materials acting as they act at the non-nano scale, acting the same way at the future sort of economy scale. So
this is an
I'm
analogy.
open to the discussion. I'm making the analogy that, you know, the future could be so significantly different, but that we do have sort of what I would consider almost kinds of clues to possibilities. And I think, didn't he mention the Alaska stipend that, so, you know, Alaska every year they put this money in from the energy, and it came up in the carbon, I thought, you know, we were sort of discussing, and I've mentioned Russia does the same thing, I believe in Saudi Arabia, that they do the same thing. The point is simply we at least allow this notion that there's this resource, and somehow geographically we decide that, okay, this is a geographically defined populace that, I'll use the word is entitled, but maybe that's not even the right word. It's just by virtue of there being big part of this populace. Every year, if you're an Alaskan, maybe you pick up somewhere around $1,200 to $2,500 because you do, because there's this natural resource, and in the future, that natural resource could be the productive capacity, productive capability of the economy. It just happens to be just by robots and artificial intelligence and and all this other stuff.
Simply put, we don't know what we don't know about the future economy, about the potential future economy.
And I would argue that even in Alaska, what makes it possible to give people these payments is not that you got oil out of the ground, at least not directly. It's that the economy has the capacity to respond to that money being spent into it. And is the oil directly leading to that capacity? Not really. You might be able to come up with a story about how the oil is a resource and it helps the economy produce more, and that's what allows the money to be spent into the economy. But it's not really a direct connection. And the fact that they get this money and the fact that it's not causing problems in the economy means there's room for the money in the economy. The oil is more of just an excuse for why people get the money, is what I would say, even today.
And I think that's an important point,
Yeah.
because I think that's actually
The oil
true
is
in a way, is that the oil is sort of, I'll call it a subterfuge, just to use a kind of a charged word. It's sort of like a subterfuge for making it okay to think in terms of every Alaskan, by virtue of living within some border, thank you Russia, years ago, receives this payment. And there I would say and I like to bring that up a lot because it's sometimes when we define what is poor, what is not poor, what is deserving, what is the most deserving, and people use words like this, or the people who need it most. And all these constructs are things that we just allow ourselves to believe, and also some people use as the reason they won't believe anything any different. Work out great.
Yeah.
So is it fair to say what I said, that little example about Alaska,
Yeah.
oil is like a PS job, or is that not?
I don't know if I would say
the
oil.
existence of the oil, I don't know. Yeah.
I don't know if I would say oil is a BS job. I think there are incentives to extract that oil. There's a market for oil, and people are selling it.
No, but in the sense that you said oil was an excuse for that money to be given to these people.
Texas don't get it. Texas has a lot of oil, right?
What's that?
Texas has a lot of oil. Texas don't get that any money, so it's not necessarily based on oil.
Yeah, I mean,
Maybe I'm stretching it too.
I think
That makes your point.
the people who are receiving the money are not the people who are extracting the oil per se.
No, I know.
Yeah.
I'm making it.
I think
I'm trying
he's
to
just
make an
saying it's an
analogy.
excuse to give people money in a way like a BS job could be an excuse
Is an
to give people
excuse to
money.
give people
Oh, I
money.
see.
Oh, okay, you got it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was
Yeah.
saying. But I don't know if
It's
that
analogous.
really
We make up work for people to do, and that's a way of getting the money. Or we make up stories about how everybody owns the oil in the ground, and then that's an excuse to give them money. But in the end, what allows us to give people money is that the economy is able to produce stuff in response to that spending.
Yeah.
No, that's a really good point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Good way to think about it. It's an easy way to think.
Does anybody maybe correct my statistics if I don't have this correct? I think I read somewhere that software development, sort of like Google's and Facebook, but normally just think of companies that are more generally involved in some sort of software development, is second only to oil in the percentage of the business, if you will, the industry, that the lowest percentage of the, I'm going to say profits, but kind of profit, that goes to revenue that goes to labor. In other words, in oil, if you stop thinking about it, okay, it doesn't take an awful lot of people necessarily to pump an amount of oil that is very, very valuable, right? So therefore, that industry generates whatever kind of revenues, and only a small amount of that revenue is required to cover the labor.
About
I would
the
say
value of software.
Yeah, software probably
Imagine my
exceeds
intuition about the value of software.
Yeah.
Software probably even exceeds it because oil and gas industry has a lot of expenses
So,
in terms
so,
of.
so yeah, that's
So
an
I read
interesting
a
point. I
number
want to
that
go to
said it
Richard because he's
didn't-
raising his hand. Yeah.
Actually, the oil industry is ripe for automation because several years ago, they had oil was like $100 a barrel, and they had all these useless employees like doing their BS jobs or whatever. And then when oil went down to like 40, they got rid of all these people, and they just implemented all this automated technology. So they could have even fewer jobs in the industry. So it's just not. There's like no incentive. There's actually like an incentive to have useless jobs. It's because it's like politically appealing or something.
Yeah, talking about how many people you hire. Like you see a Walmart commercial on TV where like we're the biggest employer in the nation.
Yeah.
You know, we have so many jobs. And like that's not something to be proud of.
Republican or
Yeah.
Democrat, the State of the Union address is about manufacturing jobs. There's a whole section in it. It seems like every time. Doesn't matter who the president is.
We've created X number of jobs in the past year.
Yeah, and that blew me away when I started to like give a crap about watching those. It was kind of weird to hear about manufacturing jobs. It's like everybody programs computers now.
Is that probably because of where the swing states are and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably
Yeah.
huge political reasons. But I just think it's.
But I
agree,
think
it's interesting.
I think the whole push to create jobs and reduce unemployment and all that stuff, that's not just politicians being political. I think most people, including politicians and a lot of economists, actually believe that jobs are good for the economy.
Yeah. It seems pretty straightforward, actually.
Yeah.
You've just grown up in America.
Yeah,
it seems
or
like
anywhere.
That's the way you should think.
Yeah. All right. Let's hear more from Chris Hughes.
And it's like a fun dinner party topic, but I find it to be distracting from the reality of what's actually happening in America today. Jobs are already coming apart, so we don't need to talk about the effects of Tesla to know that we need an income for today.
So I think he's right about that. Yeah.
I was just like, oh, I had forgotten he was still on automation. I was like, what are you even talking about?
Oh,
Chris?
yeah.
I was
You keep
like,
interrupting
jobs
him.
are falling apart, so
Yeah.
we don't need to talk about the UBI. And I was like, oh, right, this is why you don't want to have an argument about automation, but you're going to talk for like 67 seconds about it.
Yeah.
All right.
Actually, we could sort of toss out another thing on the jobs thing. I was going to talk. Anyway, so it was about reporting from the border.
Yeah.
Texas border immigrant. It was more immigrant issue. The speaker made a comment that the low unemployment in the United States today is driving blah blah blah, right? And the guy sitting next to me, we just chatted a little bit, and he said actually that he's a professor at the business school and an economist. And after the talk, he said this to me that that he was going to say this to her, but he went over to her and he said, "Look, I just want to correct you on the unemployment level. I know that the numbers that you see reflected in the media are sub 5, sub 4%, and all this, but the real unemployment level is much, much higher. And we all need to sort of like understand this." And I thought, well, that's pretty interesting coming from a Harvard Business School professor. But you can listen to Bloomberg radio and particularly in the early morning, and there's a banter between the couple of guys, and they have all these different guests on, and it's, I think, at least fair to say that there's concern that the unemployment numbers as presented as official government statistics might be off and might be way off. And some folks would offer as just an indicator, can't necessarily prove it. The demographic, the largest demographic for video games play is this sort of 30-something kind of age group. And the contention is that because this is an age group that has dropped out of the workforce and actively seeking work. And so if you're not actively seeking work, you don't appear in the unemployment numbers because you're not considered unemployed, but it suggests that there may be quite a few more people than most expect who are not employed and what we consider traditional
I think
work.
if you go back enough decades, there's also a huge change in the number of people incarcerated too, which I guess are sometimes working, but like that's a whole other weird question of like how much does that relate to poverty and like how much is that not counting in terms of who we have like productive jobs for.
Right.
Yeah, I think starting after 2008 and through the early 2010s, the labor force participation rate went down, and then it just never kind of came back up again.
Speaking to what you were saying. Yeah.
So it stayed low, and that's different from the unemployment rate.
Right.
The unemployment rate still means something because if people are actively seeking work and there's a certain number of jobs available, then that can be either there's slack in the labor market or the labor market is kind of like struggling to find people to work and that kind of thing. And it might be able to draw people in from outside the labor force and increase the labor force, but there's still meaning to that number, but it doesn't mean what kind of most people think it means. Go ahead, Richard.
They actually say that all the new jobs in the last like 18 years are like
Service.
I don't know, like gig jobs and whatnot, and they're saying that underemployment is the new unemployment.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's another one. Underemployment and, even people like having to work multiple jobs. So you created, X number of jobs, but, how many people are,
working.
Yeah, exactly. It's one person working 100,000 jobs. Yeah. He's just good at automating his work. That's how he gets away with it. Yeah.
That's most CEOs, right?
Yeah.
It's
One
also
person working
interesting,
for 100,000 people.
like how the labor market initially absorbed so many women joining the labor force too.
Right.
Like I always wonder how big a factor that still is. When people want to compare things to the 50s and the 60s, you had a huge portion of the population not in the labor.
Yeah, so the labor force participation rate really grew in the
Huge.
60s and 70s
Yeah,
by
exactly.
a lot. Yeah, and it peaked out around the year 2000. I think that's largely due to women. And, they sometimes break down the statistics so you can see, like, what's going on with men, what's going on with women, what's going on with, like, younger people, older people, that kind of thing. Yeah, go ahead, Richard.
But they say that it's actually the women entering the workforce is actually an excuse to pay people less because before women came into the workforce, there was a single male breadwinner, and he was able to provide for his entire family. And now you need two incomes to provide for your family.
Yeah.
It kind of makes sense that wages would go down.
Yeah,
You should
exactly.
expect wages to go down if you have a lot of people joining the labor force because now there's way more supply relative to demand
Yeah.
for labor.
Yeah.
So that's a kind of
But I mean, I'm sure this is also a factor. There's certainly, I've heard stories of people kind of negotiating, their income. I mean, like my mom talked about this a couple weeks ago.
Right.
Like people negotiating their incomes based on like, oh, I have a family to support. Like, and there's this
right.
kind of like,
yeah, I remember talking about that.
there's this sense of paternalism with employers and employees, and maybe it used to be more than it is now. But it's like, oh, you gotta, like we're a family, and you gotta take care of your workers,
Right.
and they're gonna be your workers for a long time. Maybe not these days, but yeah.
Yeah.
But it was, yeah.
But it seems like companies couldn't pay like way above the market rate without getting out competed, right? Even if they want to be paternalistic.
Well, there's ways to compete. There are different ways to compete. Like if you're like, we're a family company and buy our products and look at how happy our workers are, that's a way to get people to buy your stuff even if it costs a little bit more. That kind
Yeah,
of thing.
and I guess if your competitors have the same norms, then they're also inflating their prices.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, Richard.
Yeah, there's actually talk about in the computer industry and whatnot how they actually have like this agreement between the companies to not
Poach each other's
poach
employees.
each other's- yes, and how because they didn't want the wages to increase.
Yep, so that kind of stuff can happen. I guess that's kind of in the other direction. But,
Right.
but yeah.
That's the same thing I saw an article on a lot of restaurant chains had that agreement as well, where they were
You're not allowed to work in a competitor for like a year or something.
uh-huh.
Right, like Wendy's and McDonald's. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I think Chris has more to say. So back here.
So, because I think of UBI really as a theory and a set of values, it's to me possible to think about all the different ways of getting it done inside of it, modernizing the tax code, which is what I work on a lot of the time, a carbon dividend, you do a child tax credit or a child allowance. There are a lot of different ways. Even a job guarantee of sorts is a kind of guaranteed income. It's just conditional. It's tied to a public job. So, you know, you get to these challenges of where does the definition sort of start to come apart, but I think that the theory that no one should live in poverty and we should use cash as a way to guarantee that is really what a UBI is about, and that's something I think we all should agree to.
Okay, I don't agree to that.
How many people who are interested in basic income, like, do you think do basically agree to that?
This is, well, I think he's stretching it further than most basic income people would.
Yeah.
I think most basic income people at least have the concept of you're giving people an amount, like everybody, the same amount of money regularly.
Right.
Now, a lot of them would say that included in that is that it has to be enough for people's basic needs, and it has to be enough to eliminate poverty and that kind of stuff. So in that sense, he's kind of in line with that, but he's taking it way further than I think most basic income advocates would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Guaranteed job thing is hilarious.
It's guaranteed but conditional.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, no, guaranteed income conditional on job. So guaranteed job, that's seems. I mean, doesn't that run exactly counter to how I would imagine he feels about automation? And
Well,
you know, I mean,
he's fulfilling his own prophecy, right? He's like, guarantee everyone a job, and then you'll never have to worry about automation because we're going to make up work for people.
yeah. That's just weird
Yeah.
because I mean the automation technology is going to proceed.
Yeah.
But if you're thinking about the labor market as the way to provide income to people, I'm sympathetic to be like, oh,
Yeah.
guaranteed a job's guarantee is an extension of that. It was just sort of hilarious to hear him say it's guaranteed conditional.
Right.
It's like,
Right.
do you understand what these words mean? Like, I feel like it's pretty core basic because it's like, oh, this is not about like how hard you work. Like it's given to everyone.
Yeah,
But I am sympathetic to the like, oh, but the labor market is how we get money, because that's how you get like essentially socialist candidates being like jobs guaranteed. I'm like, I was with you on like your 8 other things, and I'm less excited about that. Like,
but it's
basic
really,
income instead. But I see where
it's a
you're
really
coming
deep
from.
paradigm. I mean, obviously, people are thinking about that, and maybe they feel like there's a lot that needs to be done.
Yeah.
The guy looks like the actor from Black Panther a little bit.
You're just saying that because you think all black people look the
That
same.
is not why.
This is online.
There are
People
multiple.
can see that.
There are so many black actors in Black Panther, and I'm specifically referring to one, which I
No,
guess
he doesn't
did
look
not make
anything like Chadwick Boseman.
He doesn't?
No, not
Okay,
at
I
all.
don't know.
Maybe.
It's a complimentary thing to say. I think it's the like shape of his hairstyle. I don't know. Okay, I'll take it back. He did to me.
Okay.
A little bit like him.
But, I mean, to follow up on the point, I think I can certainly see an argument of like that a jobs guarantee is more like sellable politically.
Right.
To be like, okay, well, I essentially want to just give money to people, but because we're so deeply embedded, both in the labor market paradigm and also in the idea that you have to like earn your money, that it feels easier to sell people on like, oh, well, we'll essentially make up worthless jobs, and it is to be like, well, we'll just give money. It's like, oh, but they have to be working, even if it's sort of meaningless work. Like they have to earn it in some way.
Yeah.
I mean, this goes back to my little thing about State of the Union addresses always being about jobs, about jobs that feel like are going to be obsolete.
Yeah, and Bethany's point about swing states, because like, I mean, you could in theory be like, yeah, and so then like we gave a lot of, you know, tax cuts or child credits or something to like the Rust Belt and have like essentially a similar positive political reaction, because basically you're like, oh, here are all these people who are worried about their jobs disappearing and thus their incomes disappearing. And so the easy way is to be like, oh, we create a lot of manufacturing jobs, but you could also be like, we did something else. It's just harder to create that something else to then get to brag about the State of the Union.
Yeah, exactly.
Back in 2014, Bryant, after Obama's State of the Union that year, I wrote a blog post about how frustrating it was to hear him talking about jobs over and over again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I watched Trump's one of them
Yeah.
because I was just interested, and then I was like, wait, I want to see if these are similar or different. I want to see
Yeah.
if Trump and Obama are the same or different. They were more the same. Than they were
Yep.
different. And I don't know. It doesn't really freak me. I guess. Yeah.
He probably actually had a scriptwriter for this, and he probably is one
Well,
of those,
that's
like,
the thing.
here's
I was
numbers.
interested. I was like,
You
I
have to talk about-
wonder if he's gonna fly off the handle. That's why I watched it. And then he didn't. And I was like, wait a second. Okay, are they all just like that? Are they all just written the same, and everybody just gives the same speech
There's actually an episode of West Wing where
Yeah, we could have cured cancer. Kim Seaborn.
he watches like 6 of them or something in a row.
Yeah, he's writing the same even about him and Toby.
Yeah.
He didn't say we created the best jobs. Can you go with that?
Did he say that?
I'm asking.
Presumably, right?
He has all the best words.
He has all the best
Everyone
words.
says so.
I forget why I moved to that time point, so we're gonna go to a different one.
Oh, do the one where the older man is talking.
Okay. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Let's see if I can help. There he is. This guy, right? Or this guy?
Yeah.
No, not that guy. The other guy.
Okay. Let's get one more.
My name is Christopher Lucy, not a student here, but would massive new tax programs harm the economy, and how does this help the dysfunctional who are mired in poverty and they're not really part of the economy? Because the people you describe as giving this welfare subsidy to will be people who actually work or they're already engaged in the economy. And the poverty I see around where I live is people who are not fit to work but don't have any skills to offer or nothing that they can use to be productive in the economy.
That's a follow-up question. Are those folks like disabled, or when you say they don't
Yeah, you're not gonna hear this part.
like sick?
Okay, those are two good questions.
So let me make sure I understood the first question. The first question is, how do you explain this benefit to folks who really derive a sense of purpose from work?
Or we're just gonna let it go.
Yeah, people who have a sense of pride and purpose from their work and the idea of having work, even if they don't have work, to where they might want to refuse help because for them, they'd say, I want a job, I don't want a free check.
Yeah, well, I would say I don't think those things are mutually exclusive, and I don't think a basic income is saying don't work. It's saying, for whatever reasons, people are working and working incredibly hard, but still can't pay for basic necessities, and that's an issue, right? Number two, I would also, well, I think, and it's been a really journey over the past year, but just understanding basic income from a feminist lens, and that there's all type of people, mostly women, who do work that's not considered work. It's not a job, but they're caregivers, they're taking care of sick family members, they're raising kids, etc. And I would argue they deserve some sort of compensation for the amount of work they're putting.
So I would argue that they're people, so they deserve money. And you know, if you're doing something for free and it has a lot of value, but you're still motivated to do that thing without being paid, I don't think the money should be tied to the thing you're doing, unless you need to do that to incentivize.
Right, because then what about the person who can't do that?
Yeah, what about the woman who can't have children? I don't know. Is that
Or
what
just
you're
not like
saying?
someone who is disabled, or someone who like doesn't have a parent they're caring for. Like,
Right.
yeah, do we want to leave them out? Who do we
Right.
want to leave on the street without money?
Yeah.
It's like the implicit question that they're not answering. Like, if you tie it to having to do something, does that mean you actually like are they willing to commit to like the fact that they want the people who aren't doing that to just be like starving on the street? Like, only if they theoretically could do it and they aren't, they want them starving on the street. Like, who do they want starving on the street?
Yeah.
Is what I want to hear from them when they make
They're
these
going to get
points.
to this in a second, but I want to hear from
I
Elizabeth.
was sorry. I'm assuming that his like number two is that he's then responding to like the older dude's question I mostly didn't hear because he's really soft spoken, and so it's interesting because I'm like, okay, yeah, universal basic income should go to everyone, but I also in the wage labor economy that we're in now, I do really appreciate his lifting up. Like, yeah, there's a lot of labor that we don't compensate people for, and how a lot of the economy sort of is able to run by sort of banking on like, okay, but these people will do it even if we don't pay them, and the ways in which that disproportionately like limits or disadvantages, I'm not sure what the word I want is, like certain categories of people, and the ways in which there's a differential impact of that. That like if men are like, oh yeah, I'm gonna stay home and like care for my ailing mother, we're like, oh that's so amazing, like that's so great. And when women do it, we're like, oh well, of course. The ways in which that we value work differently. So even if we're not offering to like pay the guy who's staying at home, he gets a lot more social status from that.
Right.
And the ways in sort of how we think about what work is valuable, which in a like wage labor economy is usually like, oh, this is what we're going to give money to, but also valued in different. Because like I appreciated his like talking about that, even though I agree with Bethany that I don't think we should only be like, oh well, as long as you are doing some valuable work or could be doing some valuable work or have some skills or something, like you're the only people who deserve to have enough money to live.
Again, I think we just have to be very strict separating, paying people. We have to be very strict separating money from the thing that you do, or like the value of the thing that you do. I mean, the idea is that like, I feel like I'm speaking for Alex, but
it's okay. He's happy to have more people speaking.
Just a basic income would just let a mother be a mother without having to worry about stuff at all. I mean, that's the way that I'm thinking about it. And I think that's the way that helps you separate those two things. So I also think it's really interesting the way that you talked about. I think it's cool to just say, why even put so much energy into drawing lines and boxes around? Just give it to everyone. It's like that's really clear. It's really, really simple. And you're giving a fixed number of dollars or whatever's to people, doesn't matter. The richer you are, the less it matters. So it's kind of like it's all built in. It's not like you have to cut out rich people. It doesn't make a difference.
Richard, go ahead.
With what Elizabeth was saying about how when people look at men who take care of their relatives differently, that's what happened with me and my taking care of my grandmother for 7 years. And it was only after my grandmother was put in a nursing home finally, that I found out that there was a caregiver's allowance in Connecticut that I could have gotten for 7 years.
Oh wow!
It was like $8 an hour for like a week or something like that. Wow. So I missed out on a lot of money.
It's more than minimum wage.
Yeah.
That's the minimum wage in Connecticut and Massachusetts.
Yeah, so I think something that's important to recognize, and this is from Elizabeth's point, is that there's all different kinds of value in our society, and there's like, value in like this thing that this person is doing is really important for society, and then there's value in like how much you're getting paid, right? There's like prices of labor and that kind of thing, and these two things are very different from each other. They're both kind of forms of value, but I think a lot of times in our society, I think you're right, Elizabeth, we associate how much you get paid with this other kind of value, and if you're not getting paid, then but they really are different kinds of value, and I think we need to recognize that. And I think what Michael Tubbs is talking about here is kind of going the other direction, where he wants to kind of bring those two kinds of value together by associating the basic income with the work that's being done, instead of recognizing that, hey, there's these different values, different kind of conceptions of value that we can have in our society, and that's an okay thing.
And sometimes I wonder if one of the nice things about a basic income would be to allow people to explore more fully like the value that they can contribute, even if it's not paid. Which, I wonder sometimes if people are a bit sensitive to the degree to which their job is not maximally efficient in terms of contributing value to different kinds of things. And like if it is kind of like bullshit work or whatever, and to free people from that, or to free people from this mentality where you do feel like the money that you're paid for your job is the value you're contributing to society. So like that guy talked about the guy was very soft, talked about people not having like skills or things to contribute because the labor market isn't rewarding them. But maybe if that wasn't the expectation, they would be able to think more about like what they could contribute independent of the labor market one way or the other.
So for those who couldn't really hear him, he was basically just asking, what about disabled people?
And the alcoholics and things like
that. Or people who are not able to function in the labor market. So let's keep listening.
Worked everything in. So I think it's a conversation to have, and I'm not sure in practicality I have ever met anyone. They may say something, but if I gave them a check with no explanation, they would reject it. No matter, I know rich people who, if I gave them a check, wouldn't reject it.
I have so many thoughts on this. I think that there is this lurking narrative that's about work that's directly connected to race in the United States. And it specifically goes like there are hardworking people who are trying hard to make ends meet. And we often invoke assembly lines and like white, blue collar folks from like Ohio to be like the real hardworking Americans. And what lurks just behind that is the specter of Ronald Reagan's welfare queen. The idea specifically that people of color and women are really just out to like hang out and not be meaningful participants in the economy. Now, what we actually know is that labor force participation amongst Black women is higher than it is in America today than white men. So let's just establish that all of that is wrong. Empirically,
so what he's saying is
incorrect.
Right. I'm not sure why he
Not
chose
to mention
bring
the
it
fact
up
that
right
Black
now.
women have unique challenges that white men don't in order to secure and
the other guy was like,
hold
oh,
on to employment in the first place.
I have to like have my credentials.
At the same time, as all of that is happening below the surface, there is this obsession with work, though, that crosses race, that crosses class, that crosses a lot of boundaries in America, because it is tied to a sense of virtue and a sense that, like, I want to be of purpose to my community. And so I fall out on the side that says that actually work is pretty important. I don't want to live in a future where the robots have taken all of the jobs. I think that work is like, you know, I mean, let's be honest, for myself, I don't have to work. Do I work every day? Yeah, I do. I have the privilege of working on something that I think is really important, but I work because it gives me a sense of purpose. And I think most Americans of all races, of all classes, of all backgrounds want that. So I think that work is used often cynically to do this thing, to designate deserving and undeserving. And at the same time, it's actually something that the vast majority of Americans actually want to have and want to feel. So that's why when I talk about a guaranteed income, I don't talk about it as a replacement for work, because I don't think that that's what will happen. We also know from the labor studies when we did some pilots in the US in the 70s that people didn't really drop out of the workforce. I do, however, say that if you're working, if you're doing something, you shouldn't live in poverty. And really, no one should live in poverty. It's just that I think that with the exception of the disabled, with the exception of the addicted or the mentally ill, Americans are working, and Americans also deserve to have economic security. So that's at least how I.
So with the exception of the disabled.
And even disabled and mentally ill are working.
Or a lot of them are, yeah. And I think he's not trying to say that they shouldn't get the basic income. I think that was a bit of a confusing thing.
Well, it's interesting because he has written a book and he has a plan, and it talks about providing an income floor to everyone who's willing to work.
But what if you're willing but you're disabled or something?
Right. So his argument is, if you're disabled, then maybe you would have been willing to work, but you're disabled, so you can't.
Also, yeah.
Yeah.
Also, if you're making a truly bullshit job, so you can make one up for anybody. It can be like tailor-made to whatever they can do. It doesn't have to be useful to anyone.
Yeah. That's a good point.
But I think here, like with the rest of what he's saying about purpose and stuff, I just feel like he's conflating paid work, like what someone wants to pay you to do, with meaningful contribution to people, which I think most people do want to have. And I think they're sometimes in tension with each other, like having to find paid work takes away time and energy to what you could contribute, especially if it's not a meaningful job that really needs to be there.
Right.
Or even if it is, maybe it's a job making more widgets, but like maybe you want to go do something else that's more contributing to other people. So,
Yeah, Brian.
I'm gonna beat my value source again and say that it is very, very bad to look for purpose in your life anywhere but inside yourself. And seriously, I mean, I just can't. I think it is not good to expect some structure, no matter how efficient or well put together that it is, to pull you through your life as a guy. I think he's trying to solve a really, really, really deep problem. Badly. Like, I don't think that's. It is incredibly important for people to have purpose in their life. I think a lot of people do find purpose in doing work, but I would argue that people that find the most purpose in their work, whatever it is, people that don't hate their jobs, it's because they like their jobs because they decided that they like their job, because they feel like from inside they're helping other people. I don't know. Maybe I'm kind of word salading now, but
I mean, I think it's not just that people have some job. I mean, maybe there's a little bit of this where a bunch of people have the same job. Most of them are miserable, but one guy decided that he's going to enjoy it, and then he does. I think there's some of that, but I think there's also a lot of the people who enjoy their jobs are the ones who got to choose their jobs, the ones who got to like work on the thing that they were passionate about. So I think
it's indicative of the internal struggle to find the thing you do, or the work towards your finding.
Right, but it's not like you can just make up jobs for people and hope that they Okay.
And
you can't make up virtue for people. You can't just make up purpose. You cannot just manufacture purpose for individuals. That's what that sounds like.
I think
but you can give them the freedom to find that purpose. And if we've got certain barriers in place that restrict that freedom, then people are maybe being held back from that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say concretely that he went to the same undergrad that I did, and like there's a vision. I think it's easier like when you go to Harvard to conflate like choosing what you want to do because you're passionate about it and making money from that thing. They can go together more easily, and even then it's actually really hard for college students from Harvard to like make that happen, but it's a little bit maybe more achievable than for the average person. And so he might be, I think everybody makes this mistake, but it like makes a little more sense that he's conflating those things too, maybe than if he came from a different background.
Richard, go ahead.
I read an article about how they talked about how in the first episode of Futurama there was this probe or whatever that was used on Fry right after he was released from his freezing chamber or whatever, and it told him, gave him his optimal profession at delivery boy. And so that might be some way to use in the future. And there's an anime called Gundam Seed Destiny where they actually tested the leader of a faction wanted to test everyone and give them their optimal job based on their DNA sequence or something, and so that's one of the sides that people were fighting against that.
Right.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of Germany. I guess had a system for sort of evaluating students and sort of giving them a little bit of recommendation of life direction. And I only know this because my ex-wife explained it to me, and she explained that her recommendation was to become a mortician. And as I've thought about it over the years since, the Germans are pretty smart.
I think there's more than a few countries that actually do that right now with young people. Yeah, in like high school and stuff. Yeah.
And I think one distinction I would draw is that like let's say we made up bullshit jobs for everybody, most of which weren't needed, you could then like optimally sort people into those jobs. But like that doesn't mean that should be the structure.
Well,
of
it doesn't
jobs
justify the jobs, yeah.
Right, like
Yeah,
you once you have them, you could say, okay, well, like you're more talented, as like your comparative advantage is this bullshit job, and your comparative advantage is this bullshit job. But it doesn't imply that your deepest purpose in the best functioning economy would be like that job.
Yeah, that's
so
interesting.
those
Well,
are distinct things.
This is what I said last week. The two problems that I found were that one, building this machine is very challenging. A machine that just looks at your DNA, looks at you somehow, building a test or whatever it is, and then finds out you're a 99 percentile, thing. That's one problem, and you knocked that down, because if you just have only the machine, that doesn't necessarily get you anywhere.
Right.
The next problem is finding out exactly where those people should go and if they should even do the thing at all.
Right.
Yeah, as it relates to the whole economic system working as efficiently as it can.
And we're already that machine. I mean, we already pay
So
attention.
abstract.
We already pay attention to all the feedback from our life to the best that we can, and like integrate that data and try to figure out where we should be.
Yeah, indeed. That is the story of life.
Our society and the markets are kind of collectively that machine operating.
Right. And our human brain interacting with that.
Right. Well, society and markets are made up of human brains as well. It's all brains. It's brains all the way down. Yeah. So we're getting toward the end. I want to know if
Was there something you were going to explain that when you and I talked about in the exchange or about your blog post?
about my blog post
Yeah.
about why
You asked
tax
me-
revenues are meaningless.
Yeah.
I don't know. Was there something specific you needed explained?
Oh no, I thought you said, oh yeah, you mentioned it during this meeting and just sort of give the overall sense of the post.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just this idea that government spending and taxation, the optimal levels of that stuff, have to do with how much money the economy needs and where money needs to be taken away from. And it has less to do with trying to balance a budget within the government itself. So we can think of the government as a black box, and it's got money coming out and money going in. And what are the optimal streams of that money? And I think that's the best way to get the economy functioning properly. And because I'm me and we're here, and of all the stuff I always say, I think a basic income is an important part of the stream that should be coming out of that box and going into the economy, because that allows the economy to reach its full productive potential and produce everything for people that it can. So if we have the resources to end poverty, then basic income is going to end it. If we have the resources to make everyone, super wealthy, then basic income is going to do that. But yeah, it's just this idea of not thinking about the government as being constrained by a budget, which these guys are. And it makes sense for Michael Tubbs because he's the mayor of a city and he doesn't control his own money supply. And the argument I make in my blog post is that cities should be funded by the states, and the states should be funded by the federal government, and the federal government should be creating as much money.
Unlimited funding, or what would determine the level of funding?
Limited by the productive capacity of the economy. So there's an optimal level of funding. If you try to go beyond that, you're going to have inflation or other problems in the economy. Yeah.
And how would you prevent the upper level of government or the federal level of government from cutting that funding as a lever to sort of force the politics of the subordinate political entity?
Yeah. So I mean, that's a hard question to answer, and that's not a question that I'm able to answer just from what I say in the blog post. But that's an important problem that would need to be addressed as well.
Separating policy making from influence of wealthy people. I think that could help there.
And
I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I would say that if you calculate the amount that the states and the cities get based on population, then you can't punish one state, because then you'd be violating the policy if everyone gets the same. So it would kind of be like you'd have your basic income that would go to each individual citizen, and then you'd have kind of an equivalent to a basic income that handles paying for the stuff that people need collectively, like the infrastructure and that kind of stuff. And it would be based probably on population. And that's maybe a way to help mitigate that kind of control effect from above. Yeah. So we're at the end. We can't go around to everyone right now, but I think I don't know. I'm interested to see what happens with this experiment. And I talked to Michael Stubbs last night briefly afterwards, and he's a really genuine guy. And I think he is open to a universal basic income, and he's just taking it kind of one step at a time. And I hope he helps move it forward. Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys. Let's see if I can stop streaming.